podcast for those who suffer, which is everyone.
It's a space where we can speak honestly about what it feels like to be in desolate places without losing hope.
Welcome to In the Thicket. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Erin.
Hey, welcome to In the Thicket all. I'm Erin.
I'm Rachel.
I'm Nicole.
Yes, and we are excited to have you. Guys, it's Holy Week.
Yeah, that's
well,
crazy.
it's technically not while we're recording.
Yeah, we're
it,
not
but while
recording.
you're listening to this. Yes,
It's Holy Week. Yeah,
It is
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. I love this week. I love it. It's I
Yeah.
think my favorite week
it's
of the
just
year.
kind of just kidding.
Rachel, we need to talk about something.
Can we? Whatever.
Oh, that's funny.
Regular week.
You know, although, okay, so here is a good question though. So as we come to Holy Week and the end of Lent, so some people have said this is still Lent of 2020 because it's
Yeah,
never
right.
really ended.
Right.
But as we come to this end of Holy Week of 2021, what does that look like? Like, what does Easter for you guys usually look like with your families and traditions?
I just want to say I'm super excited about the Vigil Mass because that's something, especially I guess in the last, like as an adult, I mostly go to the Easter Vigil Mass, I think. And last year we didn't get to have it. So
Yeah.
it's just being in, being in Mass and worshiping. And the Vigil Mass is just so beautiful.
It's so beautiful. Well, it's candles and incense
Mhm.
and fire and just
Yeah.
light and darkness and sound and everything. It's like so beautiful.
There
Yeah.
was an Indian priest at the parish that I used to be a youth minister at, and so you know how there's that kind of like style of singing, like where you do like the runs of the voice, like
Yeah,
that
yeah.
kind of sound.
Yeah.
And so he sang the Exultet, and it
Oh.
was like unreal. It was so beautiful.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was so beautiful.
In like that style, you mean? Like
in that
sort of-
style, yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Like it
Oh,
was
that's
like,
cool.
yeah, it was really so like the notes were the same. This was like the same melody that is usual,
Yeah.
but just like the runs of the voice, and there was this
Yeah.
like haunting dynamic
Ooh.
to it, which I love. Like I love the haunting stuff, you know, even on like Good Friday. I don't know if you guys have found this, but Good Friday, I'm like sometimes they'll put in more, I don't know, contemporary versions of some of the stuff, like Behold the Wood of the Cross or things like that. I'm like, no,
Yeah.
bring it back.
I like Behold the Wood of the Cross.
Mhm. Yeah, me too. I like the traditions, you know, like
I don't know if I've heard a ton of traditional Good Friday stuff though, because my parish that I grew up in was mostly more modern hymns. So maybe I'm just missing out and I don't even know.
I love like do 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 do.
Yeah.
It's different
Yeah.
text to it, but that's one of the
Totally.
ones that for me I'm like, oh yeah, this is Holy
Oh,
Week.
sacred
you know?
head surrounded.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we didn't even talk about Easter. We just really talked
yeah.
about Holy Week and then the Vigil. Okay.
Like, Easter's great, but Holy Week. Maybe that's because we're the podcast about suffering. We're like, oh yeah, the resurrection is great, but the suffering.
That's
Oh,
right.
man.
Let's focus on that.
Right.
Which is actually, this is our first Holy Week as In the Thicket podcast.
That's
so
True.
That is true.
Yay.
Well, you know, Erin, to answer your question, it's funny because when you say typical Easter, like my Easter in the last, I would say, well, since I moved to Toronto, basically, has not been typical. So, or even, I don't know, most people probably get together with their families and stuff for Easter, but my family is in Winnipeg and all of our extended family is here, like Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. And so we never really had Easter with family. We always had other random people over who also didn't have family. So similar to our Christmas. So only in the last couple of years when I was here did I actually start to spend Easter with like my aunts and uncles. And I was like, oh, is this like what normal people do? This is great. But then of course, you know, last year was COVID. And so I spent Easter with I live in this house. It's a convent, but it's also like a house where there's 4 of us kind of students who live here. And we just had Easter together and it was really beautiful because we all kind of live our separate lives in the house, at least like the girls who live here, and the sisters kind of have their own routines and areas of the house. But we got to actually spend these really beautiful times with them, and it was really lovely. So now I'm like, well, who knows what's going to happen every Easter? I don't know.
That's right.
So we'll see
Yeah.
what this year holds, you know?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. I'm excited regardless. I remember when I used to work at the Newman Center Chaplaincy in Toronto, we had the Easter Vigil, and it was like a late Easter Vigil, so starting at 11
Mhm.
p.m.
Whoa.
Yeah, like real like
Like
legit.
legit, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And so then it would be like 1 o'clock, or maybe started at 10:30 or something, but it's like 12:31, something like that when it was done. And then we hosted a celebration in the house
Oh,
afterwards,
that's
because
fun.
there's, all the people who are being, baptized or confirmed or whatever.
Right.
And so I used to put some eggs and stuff around the house for the students who were living in the house for like an Easter egg hunt.
Cute.
Yeah, I
Like
still love
chocolate eggs,
that.
I assume.
Chocolate eggs, that's right. Not raw eggs. That would be, can you imagine? That'd be awesome though. I broke another one. Oh man. Anyways,
Oh, it's
yeah,
gonna be
so
such a
let's
nightmare. Just
can
thinking of the
you I
cleanup.
know it would be
Yeah, right.
such a nightmare. Yeah,
That would be
yeah.
awful.
I know. Um yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna take us into our topic of the day, which
Mhm.
is today is our kind of wrap up for this series that we've been doing during Lent on euthanasia. And so we've had, the opportunity to hear from a politician, from a disability rights activist, from a physician, from a hospital chaplain. But we wanted to kind of take the time and talk about just death itself. Like the Catholic tradition has this long-standing tradition of ars moriendi, or the art of dying. So to talk a little bit about death itself, but then also on our kind of reflections, like for us, what's kind of stood out to each of us during this series. Yeah, and to kind of wrap things up like that. So yeah, to start out with, what does that look like to you? Like if you think of death, like the ars moriendi, the art of dying, what do you think of?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah. Well, I can jump in. I mean, I think of my friend who passed away a few years ago, Jean Rubel. And she was a lovely Ukrainian lady she died when she was, gosh, I don't remember, in her 80s, in 2018. But she was kind of like I mentioned earlier, we don't have any family in Winnipeg. Well, she was kind of like our family, like our
Mm,
grandma, in a sense, adopted grandma in many ways. She was at all the birthdays and Christmas and Easter. She was always, present. And she's somebody who really suffered a lot. She had she was the youngest, I think, of a really large family, poor, grew up on a farm, and I think had some like kind of sufferings as a child and family situation and stuff. Um, and she was a consecrated single person. I think consecrated. Well, I don't know if she was the same as you, Erin. I think it was more like she was a lay member of a like a
like a
like
third order
like a
kind of thing.
third order, yeah.
Mm,
Um, and she worked in healthcare, but when she was 40, she had she had tuberculosis and one of her lungs collapsed. So she lived with one lung for the last like 40 years of her life.
mm,
Oh,
And then she just had a lot of health issues. So she was like in and out of the hospital a number of times, like throughout the time that I knew her. Um, and she was housebound for the last like 3 or 4 years of her life. She was just in this little apartment and couldn't leave because she had an oxygen tank, and
right.
there's a number of different reasons why she just wasn't able to really go outside. And so um but when I was in my undergrad degree, so this is back in, I think, 2012 it would have been. I was taking a class on Christian ethics, and I was actually writing a paper on euthanasia and on what it means to die a good death, and thinking about euthanasia from the perspective of, well, how can we learn how to suffer well and how to die well, and sort of
Right.
rekindle this idea. So she was open to talking about it, and so I actually have some clips from that interview from almost 10 years ago. So I thought maybe I could play one and just kind of share one
Yes,
or two of those.
please.
And
That's great.
this is who I think of somebody who I think really died a good death. I know that just because we're walking with the Lord doesn't mean we're not going to have suffering and struggles. No, so how has I don't know, how have you experienced, because I know you've been sick many times and you still have lots of, struggles once in a while and hard nights, right? So how do you think about that?
I guess I deal with them, of course, in faith most of the time. I have my downers too.
Yeah.
And I reflect. I think the Lord just puts these reflections on my mind where, some of the people that we venerate as holy, as saints, went through horrible trials. I mean, really, even if you look at Paul in the scripture, he was close to the Lord after he converted, and he suffered. He really suffered. It doesn't say too much what his nights were like, but his days were just tormented, and he was a hard worker. And I'm not that much of a hard worker because I can't. However, sometimes the trials are really a lot. And we come to a point where sometimes, at least myself, I think of me. And oh, wait a minute, it's the Lord who's wanting me to be with him. And then it puts me back on balance. And as long as I can think of other people to pray for, I'm out of myself and thinking of somebody else and the Lord. That's where I find, as soon as I can sit back in Jesus, I'm at peace.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to have to worry about what happens. If he wants to take me, I'll let him take me.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So that's Jean. I'm actually really happy that we get to kind of involve her in this podcast a little bit, even though she's already in heaven. But
yeah, I love where she says that it, like, praying for other people, like switching from me to praying for other people, that gets you outside of yourself. And I think that's definitely one of the temptations of suffering, when you're experiencing suffering, is to have it turn you inwards. And I think that's part of the art of dying and suffering, is to be outwards, like not to be focused on the self, but to be with Christ for others in it.
I like that, with Christ for others. Because the other thing that struck me was also what did she say? Something like, I like rest in Jesus, or I just kind of like this, the image that came to mind was just kind of like, just like sitting back and letting go. And in some ways, even though it's the burden itself that's getting you to that point, it's like letting the burden, like giving the burden away to the Lord, and there's like that's possible in some mysterious way, even though you're in so much pain. And you can hear that in her voice. And like, that's the constant, that's her constant work, is like, okay, and now I'm going to learn to give this away and give it back to the Lord and go back to that place of peace,
And I think that's exactly what her kind of, I guess, process was, because she kind of talks about it, these hard nights where she would wake up and she would be just in a lot of pain, or she would be struggling to breathe, or a combination of things, and then she wouldn't be able to sleep, and then she'd be so tired, and so she would talk about that, how she would have had one of these really hard nights, and sometimes she'd call my mom, I remember, and she'd be crying, and just be like, it was so hard. But then she would talk about how she's like, but I just tried to keep my focus on Jesus and just pray the rosary and know that he's with me, and then pray for people, and I prayed for this person, and then this person came to mind, and then this person, so I prayed for them, and and then sometimes of you, and so I'm praying for you, and it would line up perfectly with me, like really needing prayer at some point, and so realizing, like, oh man, like this woman is in here suffering and like saving people's butts, like just like through her intercession, like what a powerful. And she's like, I can't work hard because I'm not physically able, but then it's like, well, this is
pretty hard work.
This is really hard work, and she's doing it, so what a warrior of a woman,
There's something that's like, like, that's really imitating Christ, because on the cross, he wasn't thinking about his own sufferings. He was thinking about us. Like, he was thinking about the people who were going to be the beneficiaries of his redemptive suffering, so there's like, but man, it's a transition. Like, it's a hard thing to do
Yeah.
that. Like we've talked
Yeah.
about offering it up and, all of those kind of things, but the reality
Yeah.
of it is
Yeah.
because it is an experience of evil, right? Like that's what John Paul says.
Yes.
Every
Yes.
Right.
suffering is an experience of
Yeah.
evil, and exactly evil is to forget the sovereignty of God, the goodness of God,
Yes.
the ability of God to transform things. Like that is what evil does. It
Yeah.
separates us from God. So
Right.
it's so mysterious that somehow in suffering, because Jesus entered into that separation, that
Yeah.
he was able to redeem that experience, so that we actually have the possibility of being with him in that. And so that it ceases to then become an evil somehow, but
Yeah.
it can become a good.
Yep.
Preach,
Well,
sister.
yeah.
I'm like, yeah, that's, I just went, like, when you were saying that, the thought that was running through my mind is like, that it's really a battle. Like, it really is, like, suffering is really being given like a sword and a shield, in terms of like the Holy Spirit is with us, and like we have the love of God with us, and then he has the victory already, but we are sort of called to participate in that battle for that victory, and it struck me because recently I've just been thinking about all kinds of work. Like, Erin, you and I are working on school stuff, and like discipline, and anybody who knows me knows that it's like oil and water with discipline. Like, I struggle so much, but I was thinking about, like, even working out, right? When you work out and it's like you hate it because it's so painful, really, but it's really a battle every time you approach something that is worth winning, that's worth experiencing. You're usually called into some kind of battle to really experience that thing. And I think the battle isn't about earning it, it's about letting go of the other stuff that's in the way of you receiving what is good, and and it's hard because that other stuff just has that hold on us, which is that kind of interior, that's like the self, or selfishness, or
Yeah.
comfort, pleasure, power, whatever, put those things in there,
Yeah.
Yeah. And when I think of Jean, I'm like, I don't think it ever got easier for her in those battles, but she just continued to battle every single day for the end of her life. Like, that conversation was in 2012. She lived for 6 more years after that, continuing
Yeah.
to have the same thing, and it got worse. And
Yeah.
yet she never, and she went through like depression, and she went through times where and she talks about this a little bit in a different clip that I won't play because it's, too long, but where she's like, I don't always feel God's presence. And she was like, if I was doing this based on if I felt God or not, she's like, that I wouldn't get very far, So she's, but yeah, just like that, the battle is a battle. Like, it's not like a
it is
fun,
a battle.
That's
easy
right.
thing,
Yeah.
but it's like, and it's just like what, like Rocky Balboa, just you keep getting up and you fight again and again and again and again,
Will you play the other clip for us, Nicole?
Yeah. So this is when she talks about, I asked her, do you think about your own death, and so her answer, I loved her answer, so I'll play for you.
But I do think of my demise frequently, because I'm at that age.
Yeah.
And if I'm not going to be thinking of it, then I'm not thinking of God. And that's what I want to do, is keep God in my presence. Because without him, there's nothing.
Yeah.
Isn't
that interesting?
So
She's like,
good.
well, of course I think of my death, because if I think of my death, then I'm thinking of God, and I want to keep thinking about God. So that's it,
It's so paradoxical,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Recently, a few like people that I know have passed away, not especially close to me, but sort of like connected, and one very tragic, like cancer, related to cancer, and quite young, and it's just got me thinking exactly about what she said. Like, I'm thinking of God because without God, there is nothing. And I think that's what the art of dying really is about, is actually realizing that nothing else is more real than God. And if we want to be the most alive in a way, which is funny because we're talking about the art of dying, but in a way, really, death is dying to this life, but like waking up to the reality of the life to come, which is that life with God, that
Mhm.
union with him, you know? So and
Yeah.
that's why I think we can call it the art of dying, because it's not really about, it's not about being ended. It's about like surrendering something to be woken up to something else that's
Mhm.
even better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like a whole I mean in kind of the medieval times and the period there's like the period of the church where Thomas à Kempis was writing and some of his contemporary writers and memento mori was a big thing, like people carrying
Skull.
around on their necks. Like they would carry on their necks like a casket, like a miniature casket with like a miniature skeleton in the casket,
Wow.
just like we think we're hardcore. No. Oh no. You wear
Your
a
little gold
casket around your neck.
cross.
That's right.
That's
Exactly.
a
Yeah.
necklace charm if I've, yeah.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. I'm
Whoa.
sure it's out there somewhere, but
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, but that's totally coming back into vogue now, like memento mori, like remember your own death. But it's not like the Catholic sense of that is not something morbid.
Yeah.
And it's also encouraging us because we have this faith, like every time we make an act of trust, it's a preparation for death. Every time we say yes to the Lord, it's a preparation for death because in the moment of death is the moment that is definitive about whether we're right or not as Christians, like whether there is heaven or not, whether God is real or not, And so that act of death will take a great amount of trust to be able to place ourselves into the hands of the one who loves us, right? So like then our whole life becomes this exercise in being able to grow deeper in our knowledge of God's love for us and our ability to trust him so that in that moment of death, it's like in that moment of death then can become this act of trust that can be peaceful and beautiful and yeah, where we're going to one that we know so that it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be full of that fear or yeah, despair or things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can
Go
maybe
Jean.
share my grandmother's experience of death. It kind of leads
Yeah.
right into that, but that's what I think of when I think about a good death. So she was 92 when she died. My grandfather died like 15 years before her, I think, and she had breast cancer, but they weren't going to treat it because she was 92, and she didn't want to be aggressive with it. And I think it was pneumonia or something like that, or water in her lungs that she went into the hospital for. It wasn't even anything to do with breast cancer. And while she was there, they did a scan and they used like a dye that, for the scan images and whatever.
Yeah.
But the dye actually caused her kidneys to fail because they couldn't filter it properly. And she had, like my grandmother, she prayed the rosary every day. She was so devoted to Our Lady, her and my grandfather both, like where she said, like, yeah, at my funeral, I want you to sing the Ave Maria and I want you to dedicate it with love to the Blessed Virgin from Ed and Inez. I think I might have mentioned that on the podcast before, but like it's so
That's cute.
like very real
So
devotion to Our
beautiful.
Lady, Yeah. And
Yeah.
also she prayed to St. Jude all the time. And so when her kidneys were failing in the hospital, basically the doctors came in and said, okay, so in order to treat this, we would have to give you dialysis, but if you choose not to have dialysis, then you'll die. And so she said, yeah, I don't want dialysis. Like I'm ready. And so my mom was saying to her, like, okay, mom, so you understand that if you don't have this, then this is it. You won't leave the hospital. You'll die. And she said, yeah, I understand. And so then my mom went out to the hallway and had this moment of like being so mad at God. Like, this woman has, like she has breast cancer now. Now she like for something that was totally fluke, she's gonna die from,
Right.
But then, I mean, my mom is a nurse, so she has some knowledge about medical stuff, And so then she had this like a moment where she just realized that actually this was exactly the answer to prayer that my grandmother had prayed for basically all of her life because she didn't want drama at the end of her life, and,
Yeah.
people weeping and mourning and singing dirges in her, hospital room, and like,
Dirges.
yeah, yeah. But she didn't want that, and she didn't want something that was long and drawn out and, painful. Like, she didn't want that, and she prayed to be spared of that. And she prayed to St. Jude all the time. And my mom realized when she was in the hallway, she's like, this is exactly the answer to her prayer, because how do you die when your kidneys fail? You go to sleep. And it's
Mm.
simple, it's not painful, it's fairly quick. Like, it's,
Mm.
this is the answer to her prayer. And so then my grandmother kind of lost the ability to talk over the next few hours. It didn't take very long. And she, when the kids were in the hallway, her daughters were in the hallway at one point talking about just, I don't know, decisions or whatever they were talking about. And my Aunt Joan went back into the room, and my grandmother was there alone with Joan. And by this point she couldn't talk anymore. And my Aunt Joan said to her, like, Mom, I feel like someone is here. Who's here? And my grandmother had her rosary clutched tightly in her hand, and she just lifted up her hand and just shook her hand in the air, like, Our Lady is here. And then she waited until my uncle got there. So her kids were there, and everybody was around the bedside, and my dad was leading everybody in praying the rosary all together, and she died while they were praying the rosary. Like,
Oof,
oh
yeah.
gosh. And even that story, right? Like, to this day, I'm like, that is a good death. And I know not everybody has deaths like that, and that some are filled with like pain, and, like, there's a lot of, but there is a possibility, like, we are accompanied in our death, especially there's this huge church tradition always of Our Lady and Saint Joseph, like
Mm.
the parents who are waiting to bring us home to their son. Like,
Mm.
and it is so real. That is the most like real experience that I've had
Right.
of how real that assistance is
Yeah.
in death. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Well, that's
Yeah,
even like,
wow.
man, I think they give me shivers just to hear, it's
Oh,
so
yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
But it's like, I'm realizing like that is the Hail Mary, pray for us now and at the
Mhm.
hour of our death.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
she
And we say
prayed, she
that
asked
so
our
many
Blessed Mother
times.
every day, pray
Every
for me
day
when
she
I'm
asked her
dying.
50 times at least,
Right.
I guess. Yeah.
So Mary, like, yeah, okay, here I am,
Oh,
That's
yeah.
so beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Oh man.
Oh, yeah, it's something I feel like you just kind of have to receive and then just kind of,
Mm.
think about. And I mean, it made me think about actually my grandmother's death also. I think I would kind of use in my life as an example of a good death, but a little bit different in that my grandmother had she had a stroke, I think when she was in her 60s, early 60s. And then she lived, so she was paralyzed on one side of her body, and she lived with that for 20 plus years after her stroke. And like many of them, not alone, like she had a lot of help and things like that. And we didn't live in the country through a lot of that time. So actually my memories of my grandmother are all with her paralysis, with her stroke. She's kind of like, I mean, I think all grandmothers like are that generation, they're just sort of like tough cookies, you know what I mean? Like they're just different. They're just made of different stuff, I think, than
Yeah.
people that came after, because they in the generation maybe before them went through so many crazy difficult things, all the wars and all this kind of stuff. So
Mm.
anyway, so she was kind of like this tough cookie, and she never stopped living. And I think that was really what stuck with me, is like she learned how to use her left hand to write, because it was her right hand that was paralyzed. And so she never stopped writing. Like she would write letters, she'd write postcards. And it was like this she had this beautiful penmanship with her right hand, and her left hand was there, but it was like a shaky kind of line. But
Mm.
it's so like to read her even now, like whatever she left, like she would always have like prayer books, so she would give away the prayer books all the time. And so she would write, to my darling Rachel from Nana or whatever, and then she'd give me her prayer. And so it's like all this evidence of her fullness of life. And then I remember I got to stay for 3 months with her, and in India after my undergrad, and I was doing some stuff there. And so I spent lots of time with her. And I just remember thinking, this woman like can't leave the house, again, like kind of like Jean, like she couldn't leave the house. But she would wake up and she would like comb her hair, and she would put on, like she would choose an outfit from her closet. And like she had so much purpose in her day, even though she went nowhere, and she had nothing in a sense that way to do. and she spent a lot of time just praying. She would pray a rosary for each of us, like for all of her grandkids. And, kind of the same thing that you were saying, Erin, about your grandmother, like those prayers, and Jean as well, like those prayers are so powerful. I have absolutely no doubt that like every single one of us have been like lifted up and helped by her prayers over like so many years,
Yeah. Well, you think of the amount of people that I know who didn't really grow up with any kind of religion or faith, and then somehow had these miraculous conversion stories, and then they're like, oh yeah, well, my grandma prayed the rosary every day. And I'm like, I think that it's like we said, God's got the whole world in his hands, but it's also like all the grandmas.
All the grandmas.
Yeah, all the grandmas. That's
helping
so
him
funny.
out. I know. It's truth to that, man. There is
Yeah.
truth to that.
Yep.
Yeah. But anyways, yeah, when my grandma died, she was, I think, in a lot of pain for a few days. And yeah, and there's some beautiful moments there. But I think, I mean, she was surrounded by, my uncle was there, my aunt was there, and they were just like, it was just very holy. It was very holy, kind of like what you were saying, Erin. Like there was just, she was sort of surrounded by, like these people who were praying for her, and then heaven was there, and like everyone who was there kind of felt that. And I think in a way, though, it wasn't really profound. It was super profound, and also it was just normal, because that, and I think that's what's kind of really cool about all these stories about Jean and our grandmothers, like and it's what you were saying, Erin, it's that they place themselves in the Lord's presence every day. And so it's like at the end, of course they were in his presence, because that was everything. That was their lives. That was every day. And I think that's, for me, what's just really striking me about this conversation is that the art of dying is really about living in the Lord's presence every day. So that at the moment of death, you said this once, Erin, in one of our Exodus meetings, like it's just another little death. Like it's another little letting go.
Yeah, right.
And just that final entrance fully into the love of God. But you've been making that journey every day before that,
Yeah. There's a song by I don't know if you guys know John Foreman. He's the lead singer. Yeah.
Love him.
I think he's somebody who if you want music that relates to Ars Moriendi, go listen to some of his solo stuff, because that's kind of a theme that really runs through his music. But there's a song where I think he talks about, I don't remember all the lyrics, but the chorus is, maybe I've been learning how to die, been learning how to die. And it's this like beautiful thing, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's so much of our life. If we can learn how to die every day, like little sacrifices, like exactly what you're saying, then it's like, okay, that's just letting us learn how to do the big death, which then becomes just a little death.
Yeah, exactly. Well, which is a great actually transition into this last part of our discussion today, which is just to ask about this whole series of euthanasia. If there's like what from it has stood out to you or impacted you, like what has hit your heart and resonated, which is such a good question. Like we wanted to have this because the whole purpose of the series was both to bring people awareness and to hear about, some of the people that Bill C-7 in Canada was affecting and all of those kind of things, but then also to give us a greater understanding of death itself and what that can look like, or, where the Lord is and is in it. So what is that? What's kind of hit you guys about that?
What's throughout our conversation, I've been thinking about that actually. And I've been thinking about how, this idea of a good death is exactly what people are after when they seek euthanasia. This sort of feeling of peace. There's a sense of control. There's like, that's what people want. And why is it that it's not a good death? Like that's what's been kind of, why is that not a good death? And I think it comes down to sort of I don't have the answers, but one answer I think is what Jean said, where I think it's like a good death. It's actually, at the end of the day, it's not really about all of those external realities. It's really about, it's Jesus or nothing in a sense. At the end of the day, it's like, am I in the presence of God right now or not? And I think when we honor life and we honor God as the master of our life and of our death, then we're starting to enter into the realm of what it means to have a good death.
Mm.
And when we euthanize ourselves, we're rejecting the gift of life and rejecting the possibility that suffering has something for us, and that the path to our death is going to be life-giving. I think that there's this idea that dying, kind of what you were saying with John Foreman, like I'm learning how to die, that learning how to die is a despairing reality instead of a reality that can bring life, not just to us, but to others, and can reflect the love of God to others. So, I mean, but it's very tempting, right? Like I think that's what I'm able to see is when people want to be euthanized, it's very, very tempting because it just looks like a good death in some
Yeah,
ways.
I
I
think
think
so.
that's the challenging part about it, or that's the insidious part about it. That's a good
Mm-hmm.
word, is that this is exactly what the evil one does, is he takes something that has a grain of truth in it and then he twists it so that it is perverted in its end, you know. And so that's like, you know, if you hear Christopher West talk about the theology of the body, if you're going to a, you know, a frat party looking to get laid and drunk, what you're really looking for are the sacraments of marriage and the Eucharist, you know, like that's, but there's something to that, right? And then
Yeah.
says in death, it's like looking for that good death. It is a good, it is a good thing that people
Yeah.
are searching for, like
Yes.
looking for that good death. But then the
Yeah.
evil one in that has basically rested, like it's instead of it being in God's hands, your whole self in God's hands, it is like a taking of your whole self and putting it in your hands apart
Yeah.
from God. And that's
Yeah.
exactly the question of the beginnings of even of
Mhm.
sin, right? Is like, this is what Adam and Eve did, is they, you know, grasped for themselves, you know, this knowledge, you know,
Yeah.
from the tree of good and evil. Like they're taking things into their own hands, or
Mm-hmm.
attempting to. And it's the same in our death. You know, we have that opportunity to either choose with Adam and Eve to, you know, take things into our own hands, or to choose like what Jesus has done, like what he
Yeah.
offers us through what he's done, you know. I
Yeah.
think that's the thing that stood out to me, is that is this idea that we talked about radical personal autonomy, and that is such a facade, and it is not true. We do not have like a radical, well, there is a choice to in some sense exercise this, you know, radical personal autonomy, or this facade of what it is, but it's not true that it doesn't affect other people, and it's not true that we should have the ability to, you know, just choose everything at whim, you know, like that
Mm-hmm.
that it doesn't
Yeah.
have an impact on the world and on other people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think for me, and even just kind of reflecting this as we're speaking and as we're having this conversation today, what's coming to mind is that, well, I'm reminded of a course that I took. This is the same course I mentioned that I interviewed Jean for, and it was a course on Christian ethics by Chris Hubner, taught it at the Canadian Mennonite University. Just shout out to Chris Hubner. He's an amazing prof. This course changed my life. But you know that, okay, so Bill C-7 passed.
yeah.
And the amendment that we were hoping for that would protect people who have comorbid mental health issues, that did not go through.
Nope.
So this is like the worst thing in terms of the political, what we were hoping for. The worst thing happened. But I remember when, you know, one of the things that I remember sticking out to me from this course, and that's coming back to me, you know, through our conversations, is, well, how do people grow in virtue and change? It's when you see someone else who is living in the way that it shows you, I could live like this too. We need to know that there's a real option. That's like some language, I think, from like virtue ethics and things. Like, we know that there's a real option for living in a different way. So I think that when we have like these stories, like Erin, you're talking about your grandmother and talking about Jean and these different people that we've known, you know, Rachel, that you're talking about your grandma as well, and that we've known who died these good deaths. Like, we need to tell those stories, and we need to, because that shows us, this is what it could look like. Because if we focus only on, well, this is what euthanasia looks like and this is why it's wrong and da, da, da. Okay, that's part of the equation, but we've got to have a visual, a picture of what it actually means to have a good death. So I think like our conversation today is actually really crucially important. And that, like, I think that's like the next steps for us as people who believe that it is possible to have a good death, and that that's not what euthanasia is, that it's something else, is to to continue to have relationships and be present to people who are suffering and who are dying, like in our own lives, whether it's like our aunts and uncles or people in our church communities or whatever, but be present to those people, um, because for two reasons. One is that no one should be alone. We shouldn't let our people be alone. We need to be active in that, but also because we can learn something about what it means to die a good death from people who are suffering and who are holy people at the end of the life, so we can have those stories to tell. Someone comes to us and says, well, why is made wrong, it seems so good. You can tell that story of this person, because guess what, humans don't care about information in graphs and stuff like that, but our
We
brains are
don't.
wired for stories. That's what
Yeah.
we're wired for.
Yeah.
Just like on an evolutionary kind of perspective. So like
That's
we need to
cool.
have those stories. We need to
Mhm.
be with the people who are living those stories.
Yeah.
So I think
And
that's what,
it's the story of life, like
yeah,
like like evangelization is our mission, right? This is who we are in God. Our whole life should be, but evangelization is not actually primarily just, me standing on a corner. I mean, actually, I would say I would not highly recommend standing on a corner and just shouting about Jesus. Maybe
yeah,
that
it's
is a
pretty annoying. Yeah.
particular charism that
Yeah.
somebody might have, but in general, no. In
Right.
general, actually, it's primarily the witness of my life that leads to the opportunity to share Christ explicitly with people. That's like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
Evangelium Nunciandi. If you haven't read that, highly recommend it. But it is the witness of life, and something that is inherent to that, like Christ living in you, that will cause a pause in people to say, like, what is that?
Yeah.
And the power of a good death to do that is like,
Yeah.
again,
Right.
it's like suffering does that. Being able to suffer well and with joy and with some
Right.
kind of peace is so radically different from the
Right.
world. It causes that in people. But death, I think, even more than suffering, because it is the final
Yeah.
place where that witness of, of choosing radical surrender and
Yeah. Right.
trust in God.
That is
Oh,
the thing, because we control is an illusion. We don't have control.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so the times we try to grasp control, it's just diving into that illusion even more. But for
Yeah.
somebody who chooses to stay surrendered and abandoned to the Lord and his will,
Mm-hmm.
that is radical. And it's going to be even more radical now, because the witness of a Christian who
Mm-hmm.
dies without maid, it's like, why would you do that? Why would you
Yeah.
choose to suffer and let yourself suffer if you had this option? But it's like, okay, that's going to become a stronger witness now. It's people who choose not to
Yeah.
end their own lives
Yeah.
when they're in suffering.
Um,
Mm.
yeah, well, I know we have to sort of get to God Winks soon, but I think I also wanted to mention that the difference between hope and despair that's present as we
Mm.
reflect on the euthanasia conversation, because I
Mm.
think death can be seen as a way out of
Mm-hmm.
life. That's also a false kind of view of death. Even for Christians, like we can approach our death in a way with joy because we know it will unite us with Christ.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a difference between having that posture and like looking for a way out of this life, which is a gift, that is a sacred gift
Mm-hmm.
that God gave us. And I think that attitude of despair is why we can engage on this issue in the public sphere with people who
Right.
are not Christian, because the virtue of hope is something that we can understand, that we can speak to the heart of somebody else who doesn't even know who Jesus is,
Yeah.
on the foundation of that reality of hope, because hope is a language we can and we need to learn how to speak that language to many different people. And that's,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think,
Mm-hmm.
speaking on sort of the political and policy kind of sphere of this. We had a conversation after Bill C7 passed, our team, which is the three of us and our prayer warrior. We had a conversation about defeatism that exists in our culture, and not just in secular culture, but in Catholic culture as well, where we think, okay, we're in this culture and like there's nothing we can do. And, that is not the posture that the Lord is calling us to have.
Right.
On every sphere, we have to fight back at
Yes.
whatever the battlefront is now. So, okay, we lost to Bill C7, but Garnet Jennis, who we had on our podcast, has like shown, other opportunities that we can have to actually maybe stop the comorbid mental health kind of
Right.
stuff.
Because this stuff doesn't come into law for another 2 years. So there's actually a lot of time to do stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. So in a Canadian context, our Canadian listeners, there is more stuff that can be done on every level.
There's an election that will happen before then.
You know?
Exactly.
Get engaged. Yay. But why? You know, the reason why is because the narrative of despair packaged as, when, you know, in a different episode, I talked about Cardinal Collins, packaged as this like neat, clean, beautiful thing that looks like a good death that is actually despair. That narrative, those stories, they get embedded in our culture, and we are required to get in the way of that.
Tell other stories.
Do whatever we can. So yeah.
Amen. Oh man, ladies, this is
man, ladies.
I say
That's
that
our
every
thing.
time.
I know,
Every time. It's so funny. This is great. Yeah, this is good. Okay, I'm gonna share first for Godwinks, only because mine is kind of like a memento mori kind of thing.
Mine is too.
Ooh.
Go. Sorry,
okay.
I wasn't saying it to like cut you in line, but like
my Godwink first. Just kidding. So I'll post a picture of this on Instagram and Facebook so that people can see it. But what I'm holding up right now to the camera on Zoom is a relic of Saint Stephen. So it's Saint Stephanie proto martyr. So the first martyr of the church.
Like the first guy. Yeah. Wow.
Like the first, like Stephen, who was stoned, you know, and not high, like had rocks thrown at him until he died. That's right. Yeah. But my very first week working at the Newman Center in Toronto, Catholic chaplaincy there at U of T, there was a woman who came into the office. She was moving. She had a bunch of broken rosaries and stuff in a container. Was like, hey, I'm moving. Can I give these to you? And I was like, I guess so. I don't know what to do with these things, but so she left them anyways. And I was digging through after, and there was this relic in there, but I had no way to get a hold of her. I didn't even know her name, so it's not like I could be like, oh my gosh, you forgot your Saint Stephen, relic.
Right.
But so this thing has been like this relic has been with me. And I mean, I don't know 100% of whether it's authentic and all of those kind of things, but I don't really care because it inspires devotion. And that is what relics are supposed to do in the first place.
100%. Yes.
To inspire that devotion and that confidence. But I feel like the Lord gave this to me for a reason, because, even just the suffering, like it's like dying to yourself, or like recognizing what it takes in our lives to really follow him is to like be willing to follow him even unto death,
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was
like your
cool
memento mori, which could be like a pun. Get it? Your memento.
Yes,
mori.
that's right. That's right. That's right.
Sorry,
that was a good dad joke. I liked it.
Yeah,
okay, do you want to share yours, Nicole?
Sure. Yeah. So mine basically I was just going through some anxiety this week, and I ended up sharing with one of my housemates who's quite a number of years younger than me, and I sometimes don't want to burden other people with my problems sometimes, but I was like, okay, I'll share what's going on, so I shared with her, and she just she's great, and she listened, and then she's like, well, I don't really have much advice, but this might sound weird, but do you ever just think about your death, and she was
Nice.
like, just to remind that that this is not the end, that heaven is coming, and just remember that you're gonna die. She's like, I don't know, that sometimes just helps me when I'm going through rough stuff,
So great.
It was so great, and it just like it helped.
Yeah.
It kind of like, it was just a little thing I remembered, like, oh yeah, right. It was like all of the concentric rings of problems that I'd sort of been getting caught in my mind. I was like, oh yeah, this is just right now. That's not going to be forever. And there's beautiful goodness. And, whenever I think of heaven, or when I think of dying, the thing I think of is like hugging Jesus, because Jesus is also fully human, but like, it's like we're in this long distance kind of like FaceTime relationship with Jesus on earth. When we get to heaven, we actually get to hug him or something. I'm not sure exactly how that works, and if theology sound behind it or anything.
Nicole,
but like that's what I'm looking forward to. So,
nice.
Headlines: Catholic girl knows what heaven is like. Will
That's right.
be able to hug
Jesus. That's awesome. Yeah. How about you, Rachel?
Mine is so not that profound. Mine is about Korean barbecue. So
that could be
really
profound, sweet.
It could be. Actually, it
Yeah.
was a very, in some ways, like at least taste bud wise, a profound experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I love Korean barbecue, and a friend of mine and I, we just were like missing going out for it for like whatever COVID, this whole time. So it's been open. There's a Korean barbecue place that's open near my house. And she was like, okay, I'm going to come down, and this is the day that I can come. And we're like, oh, that's great. That's great. And then it dawned on us that it was a Friday and it's Lent. And we're like, oh no, Korean barbecue is like all meat, basically.
Yeah.
So like, okay, maybe we can like fast, because it's the only day that we could get together and do this. And it was like very special to us. So maybe we can pick another day and fast, and like that'll be like our Friday. And then just for that meal, because we're hanging out, maybe that'll be okay. Maybe. So we're thinking about this. And then we realized, it's the Feast of St. Joseph. It's the Solemnity of St. Joseph. We're like, we can totally like eat our hearts out. So that's what we did. So, and that was literally a couple days ago that we're recording this, like so I'm still full. Not a couple days ago, yesterday.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yesterday.
Nice.
Last
Nice.
night. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's awesome.
So thank you, St. Joseph, for so many things, but also for Korean barbecue.
Amen.
Unofficial patron saint of people who like to eat meat in Lent.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It was so funny though, the amount of memes that were on like Facebook and Instagram about eating meat because of St. Joseph yesterday. Like I was laughing. I had a good chuckle,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
Love it.
Okay, ladies. So yes, if you have listened to the series, or whether this is kind of just your first episode or whatever, like the series is there, so you can go back and re-listen or forward it to people, or in the next couple of years, as we're kind of still going through these things, I would encourage you to do that. Like take the episodes and kind of send them to people if you're having conversations about it or things like that. And then on our website, we also again have the euthanasia series, kind of things that you can do in terms of political action, but then also in terms of kind of community action, like support in your community and what you can offer for that. So we encourage you to check that out as well. And with that, we will end off for this episode.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, guys.
Yep. We love you. We'll see you, or you'll hear us next week. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of In the Thicket. If you like what you hear, give us a rating and hit that subscribe button. We have new episodes every Monday with more stories and honest conversations about life when the going gets rough, and the hope and humor amidst it all. We'd love for you to join our community on Instagram and Facebook at In the Thicket Podcast. While you're there, let us know how we can pray for you. God bless, and see you next week.